Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, conversations with the world's most inspiring dyslexics, where we find out what dyslexic thinking is and how each of us can employ it to change the world. Today I'm joined by the incredible activist and brilliant dyslexic thinker Erin Brockovich. Erin, you use your dyslexic thinking to take on the might of a utility company whose carcinogenic chemicals were poisoning residents of Hinkley in California. Your persistence to right a wrong meant you won the largest direct action law settlement in US history for the residents. You've said, "What happened in my career has been about knowing myself and realizing my flaws and my strengths, to access what I'm really good at and what I'm not so good at, and tune out the voices that get inside your head and make you think you can't do something." That is an amazing quote. Welcome, Erin. It is such an honor to have you with us today.
It's great to be here with you. I'm so excited. Thank you.
So tell us about your dyslexic thinking and how it helps you to do what you do.
As a child, I hated school, which was very frustrating to my mom and my dad, for sure. My dad is an engineer, very critical thinker. My mom was a journalist and a sociology major. She, at one time in her career, was a school teacher. So the idea, these, bachelor degrees, engineer people, what is wrong with their daughter? The other ones go through college, they're brilliant, but I'm a troublemaker. And that's really kind of what I was seen as. And I didn't like school, and I'd often wonder, didn't pay attention in class. I wondered why I was here. It was a dreaded bore, and I started just drifting out the window, and I found myself being attracted to nature. I was always outside. Every single thing about the elements around me fascinated me. The cloud formations in a tornado, the oppressive weather, I could sense it, I could feel it. My dad called me a human barometer. Everything I needed to know, I learned from nature. It's balance. It's acceptance. It's embracing. It's diversity. The curiosity that it made me feel. That's where I gravitated to. It accepted me the way I was, and I was learning from it. So how I got through school at the end of the day is probably a little bit of a miracle. But I learned from my environment. But I had some parents that were really helpful to me in trying to understand. I couldn't even tell you what was going on with me. I knew I knew. My parents knew I knew. My mom would always tell you, you cannot beat this girl at a game of Go Fish. You cannot. I knew what I was doing. I'm snapping a photograph. I'm filing it. So I knew where that card was, and that card came up. I knew how to match the cards. But nobody understood why. So I just kind of hopped along in school. And I can remember certain teachers that were more harmful to me than not. Like my second grade teacher, and I still remember her name, Mrs. Candlin. She's mean. She's like, you're not doing this right. What do you need, special ed? And I mean, it just felt so icky to me. And then my fourth grade teacher, Winnie Bowersocks, oh my gosh, she had this empathy. Now, mind you, I wasn't getting things right, but she'd pick up on things like, oh, your penmanship is beautiful. So she'd have, where you do the S patterns up on the board, and I'd always have, the gold star. And that made me feel like I was accomplishing something. So how I got through the educational system would depend on what kind of teacher I was or wasn't around. What was hard for me is my friends, and even starting around 7th, 8th grade, they all have these great grades. I don't. So I compensated as becoming a class clown. I was titled the girl most likely not to succeed. But if I wasn't good at grades, I had to find another way that I wasn't teased or ridiculed or laughed at. So I became kind of like the class clown and kind of the popular girl and the fun girl. And then in high school, things started getting way more challenging. I needed the grades. My dad didn't understand me as an engineer. Everyone told me I'm bad at numbers, but I'm actually really good at numbers. And he couldn't figure out how I was getting the problem right when I wasn't doing the steps. It just drove him insane. So, my mom became that cheerleader for me. She helped me with the power of a word, stick-to-itiveness. I always felt like giving up. I always was in a heap crying after a homework session with my dad. I could get to the answer, but that wasn't necessarily satisfactory because you're not doing it the right way. So all of my educational became a box. I call it the matrix, and I don't like it in there. And I don't want to do it your way. And not because I'm stubborn, but it doesn't make sense to me, and I can do it another way and get to the answer. So why are we having all these problems? So my mom helped me with the power of stick-to-itiveness. Every time I wanted to quit or I was crying or having a fit. And I challenged her on the word. I thought it was a made-up Kansas slang word. I'm born and raised in Kansas. She read me the definition. Noun, a propensity to follow through in a determined manner. Dogged persistence born of obligation and stubbornness. Okay, see, ding, 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 ding. This is all you had to say to me. Stubborn is my middle name. I'm dogged. I'm determined. I'm persistent. These are all words that I was. And so I took it as the little engine that could. I think I can. I think I can. I know I can. I know I can. And that really got me through life as I was constantly being challenged. My dad was instrumental to me about teaching me about the environment, water. He'd say, Erin's very much like water. If she's tumultuous like a river, this is a good sign. That means she's happy. That means she's active. That means she's figuring things out. But if she goes quiet like a river, there's trouble. And he was right. I get quiet before storms. I instinct things. If I felt danger, very much like an animal. So he was really instrumental to me in my connection with the environment. And then a school teacher in high school, I think, really busted me out of everything. I knew everything in class. I was Miss Chatty. She'd ask a question. Oh, I know. It got to the point where she goes, Erin, you've answered every question. Somebody else answer it. But I knew. And then we'd have a big, huge final, and every time I'd fail. And I really never thought about these things or the component of dyslexia or what it meant. All I knew was everybody told me I was different. So therefore I was. Everybody told me I was the underdog. I wouldn't succeed. I started to think that myself. Those were the things that hurt me. It wasn't the bad grades. It wasn't dyslexia. I didn't know what the hell that was. Really, I knew, and that's all I could tell you. So I had a teacher, Kathy Borseth. She was my psychology teacher. She went on to work at the FBI. But she stopped me as everybody was leaving class and she was passing out the exams. And once again, I had a big fat F. So she asked me, everything okay? I'm like, yeah, why? She said, we got another F. I'm like, yeah, what's new? She said, everything okay at home? And I'm like, okay, is that where we're going to go because I get an F, something's wrong at home? I go, everything's fine. She said, well, I don't understand. You know, but you fail the reading. Is there something wrong? And I said, well, they'd say I have a dyslexic thing, learning disabled, because look, all through my educational system, I was getting thrown into some disability class, some special needs class. They didn't even understand me there. It was just a source of frustration. She didn't miss a beat. She didn't gasp or go, oh my God, what is that? She goes, interesting. Let me ask you a question. If I give you this test orally, can you pass it? I'm like, yes, I can. She said, you want to take it now? I'm like, sure. She said, I'm going to scramble it up. I'm like, do it. And she did. And she just looked at me and she goes, wow. She wrote A+ on my paper. I get very emotional still because, well, first of all, what that did for my GPA was a pretty significant jump that made my parents, oh, she's going to graduate with a 2.0, PJ. My mom's name. But what it did for my self-esteem, it was validating that I knew I wasn't so weird after all. And she just astounded me. And what she did for me, I've never forgotten. But she was willing to step out of the matrix. That's what I call it. I don't like a box. You know, my mom always said to me, education had become a standard of conformity. I didn't want to conform to that. It didn't make sense to me. I had to be who I was. And so Kathy Borsep helped me do that.
It just takes one teacher, doesn't it?
One teacher, one person to give you that chance.
A lot of what you've described in that answer is dyslexic thinking, and I can never say it, Tuitiveness is just that dogged persistence.
Stubborn.
And, yeah, absolutely stubborn. And I think that persistence and that wanting to challenge the way things are done, challenging the status quo, they're really, really strong dyslexic thinking skills. But wow, that must have helped you in what you did and all of your work in Hinkley.
It helped me so much, but the stigma didn't go away. It kept popping up in other ways. And I was sharing earlier, so my first husband, it's so sad that I have to talk about first husband, second husband, third husband. Is that another dyslexic thing? He was a very intelligent man. He was like a head of Dean Winter Reynolds, all about finances. Everyone tells me I'm terrible at numbers. I could never be a doctor, but yet that's really one thing I'm actually really good at, unbeknownst to me, though. It took a weird way for me to figure this out, and that's another story I guess I could get to. But I'm very visual. I have a photographic memory. When I read, I'm not reading to comprehend. I'm scanning. I'm looking for numbers, and I'm almost photographing the page, and then I file it away. And when I need it, it'll come up. So it's a picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words, right? And so we had bought a new house, and you know how you put contact paper down in the drawers and where your glasses are and stuff? Yeah. He'd come home, and it'd be done. He's like, how'd you do that? I go, what do you mean, how did I do it? He goes, do you have a ruler? I mean, can I help you? Do you have tape measure? Did you measure that? I'm like, no. He goes, then how'd you do it? I'm like, I just looked at the size, photographed it, drew it out on paper and cut it, and it fit. He goes, that's impossible. Here we go again with my dad. I can't believe this. He actually sent me to a bunch of specialists in Reno, Nevada. They did a whole brain thing on me, much to his dismay. He said she's quite bright, but he could never figure it out. I didn't understand it, but that's just what I did. So even at 64 years old, the stigma's still not gone. The judgment's still there. Even when I began my work in Hinkley. And Hinkley was the perfect storm for me. And what had happened was Ed brought me a box. In the film, you can see it if everyone's seen Erin Brockovich, and not everyone has, but I'm thrilled all these years later. There's almost more of a relevancy with the film than there was then.
It's a brilliant, brilliant film. How accurate is the film to your story?
99%.
That's amazing.
99%. I never saw that coming. Never conjured up anything like that. Really, listen, it was a struggle enough as a dyslexic. If I had come home and told my parents, I think I'm going to uncover a mass tort litigation and Julia Roberts is going to play, I think somebody might have thought about institutionalizing me. I mean, they would have gone, what? Have you lost it? So, again, being visual, as I was going through the box, and listen, I went through the box. I needed a job, and it took a lot for me to get the job. Ed was like, other than, being able to sit up on your own, what can you do? I'm like, well, I'm a single mom. I work hard. I'm good with people. I think you even saw that in the film when Julie was interviewing with him. And that was me. He really gave me the job because I annoyed him. See, I have the power of a word called stick-to-itiveness. So I kept coming back and coming back and coming back. And so he finally gave me a job. He brought in an archive box. And he said, do you know how to open a new case file? I'm like, sure do. Hadn't a clue, not a clue what I was doing. So I started going through the box. I wanted to know what was in it. I was curious. I didn't want to lose my job. And I was going to have to bluff my way out of this one. So I started reading everything. But lucky me, all these blood tests were done in a bar graph visual. I'm like, ooh. So I could clearly see the red line running straight off the paper. And I'm like, ooh, what is wrong with these people? Then when I was looking at their name and address, male, female, their age, they were children. I'm like, wow. Now, if these were my kids, I want to know what the hell this means. So I started looking up T cells, red cells, lymphocytes, looking at comparative numbers, and everything was leading me to disease or cancer. And I'm like, this is weird. So I asked Ed if I could go out there. Nobody wanted me to go out there. Everybody thought, she's not going to use a time card. She's going to cheat on the time and da-da-da-da-da. I can't believe I just did that. Because that's how mad they make me. And Ed, once again, sure. I got this from Ed all the time. Can I go out to Hinkley? Yeah. He wouldn't even look at me. I just got the hand. Sure. Shoo. Go. I'm like, okay. So I went out to Hinkley. That is where the perfect storm brewed for me. And I can really look back now and tell you, I've always had an almost sixth sense. My parents could tell you. It's a little bit creepy. I could tell you a tornado was coming 10 hours before. You can feel it. I was sensitive to barometric pressures, sky change colors, sounds, auditory. I used to have little gerbils and hamsters. And early in the morning, they would sometimes stampede. Well, they were telling me something, and they were feeling something. So when I went to Hinkley, the minute I got out of my car and stood on the ground, I could feel it. It was like screaming at me. And I'm looking at trees that have the tamarisk trees, this white, goopy honey substance coming out of them. I'm like, that is really weird. This is so weird. And I'm so cautious about saying it because I've been teased about it so many times. I could feel the water telling me it was dying. The cows were covered in tumors. People were telling me outlandish stories. And I'm standing there and I have a lot swirling around in my mind. And I'm like, what would be causing this? I'm like, oh my God, it's the water. It's the water. What happened to the water? And that's what set me off on my whole journey in the big PG&E lawsuit. And right from the get-go, everybody wanted to stop me. And the more questions I asked, the more pissed off they got. Now, I had learned the more questions I asked and the more pissed off you got, the more I was on the right track. So I became very persistent. Here's that stick-to-itiveness again. And everybody'd say to me, you're not a doctor. You're not a lawyer. You're not a scientist. But you're not the governor. What is it do you know? I'm like, here we flip and go again. I go, well, let me tell you something. I don't have to be any of that to be human. And to tell you, those two-headed frogs that I see and you're not going to gaslight me off of, and the green water coming out of that tap is effed up. You've now backed me up on principle, and I'm not coming off of it. And I'm going to find out what's causing this. So what happened for me with these people and what I connected to is they were always being silenced. Nobody believed them. I did. And what we did for each other, I believed in them and they believed in me. It was unbelievable. And what I learned in Hinkley was kind of my tools and my trade and what I was operating from. I call it my 4 L's. Logic, because everybody wants to think logically. And I've always been, what the hell is logic anyway? It's common sense. It was my instinct. I learned that if I listened to my gut and I used those instincts, I would naturally, logically work my way through an issue. And I learned that 1 + 1 is not 2. 1 + 1 is 1,000 or more. When I got 1, and I got 1 more, and I got 1 more, we began to leverage ourselves in numbers. So my leverage became the people. We helped each other. 1 and 1, we became 50, 100, 200, 500, 600. All of a sudden, everyone's like going, what are they doing out there? What's going on? So I've got my logic, my leverage, my loyalty. We were going to be loyal to each other, loyal to the environment, loyal to the future health of those children. And my last L is love, which always sounds silly, but logic, leverage, loyalty, and love. I just don't feel we were born to hate. I worry about the world right now, and I feel the hatred. And I could feel the hatred out there. They could feel the hatred. But with love, we were able to overcome. We were able to collaborate. We were able to respect. We had empathy. We had appreciation, understanding, patience, tolerance. All of that was love that got us through to the end. So, well, my education system wasn't that great. I started to slowly learn when I began my work in Hinkley that I could be good at something. And that's when I learned what I always felt, but I'd never accepted or said to myself that I accept you, Erin, for who you are. And I began to accept and embrace whatever I had, and you could call me weird, was my gift.
That's an absolutely wonderful story, and if anybody hasn't seen the film, they absolutely have to, because your sass and your just the relationship that you built up with those people and the trust they had in you is just very, very special. And I love the fact you say it starts with one person. Everything, any change, just starts with one person who's brave enough to stick their head up and say, you know what? This isn't right. I'm going to do something. So
it's so true.
Stick-to-itiveness, whatever you call it, it's just that one person. We can all make change. I think also the other thing that you've described is very much how when dyslexics lean into their strengths and really recognize what their strengths are, there is no stopping them.
You're very true. Very true. You know, I live in 4 spaces. I'm either in the stratosphere somewhere. I'm very... So, you know, sometimes I feel very ADD, or even my kids, Mom, go take a Xanax. I'm like, I'm going to take a Xanax. I mean, my brain is just busy. If I'm not there, I'm in a deep dive. And I'm a great researcher. Again, I'm not reading. I'm photographing. So I will be in a 120-page document, and I can see one number on page 12, but they're going to switch the number on me on page 68. So I'm going to go back to page 12. So I go in and out, and I highlight their inconsistencies, and I create hot dog books. It's easy for me. People don't understand it, but I can do 22,000 pages in a day. But that's because I'm not reading and comprehending everything. And the camera's going off. So I'm either in the stratosphere, I'm either there, or I am the funnest person you can be around. And if I'm not doing one of those 3, I'm flat out exhausted.
It sounds exhausting.
I've got 4 speeds. Oh, you're exhausted too. Gotcha.
What I found really fascinating in the film, and I know we've spoken about it since, the lawyers came in, tried to take over the case, and they just, with all of their academia and degrees, they just managed to completely mess things up. Tell me about that and why you think you made things happen and they didn't.
There were so many dynamics to that. You know, my dad always taught me, Erin, ego. Egos always bring people down. They were arrogant. I didn't like that. Well, I had a lot of names for him. I'm not going to say it on the podcast, but and a lot of the girls, that's where I got the 2 left feet and ugly shoes. And I don't walk into places and just pop that off to somebody. You're talking time had passed, and it was almost beneath them. But really, Erin, nobody remembers all that information. Yeah, they do. Roberta Walker, 760-253-5454, and that is her phone number. Game on. Didn't believe it. Ed learned early, like kind of Kathy Borseth would do. I know she knows. However she wants to get to the answer, I don't really care how she gets there. She got there. So Ed was the same. Everyone's like, you're going to let her go out to Hinkley. He'd go, let her go, let her go, let her go. So if Ed didn't push on me and Ed let me go, I would just naturally do what I needed to do and bring him back what he would need as an attorney. So the case almost didn't happen because Ed was having a hard time with the funding and everybody told him he wouldn't win the case because of statute of limitations. So those big attorneys came in, and the day they left, they had to go back and think about if they were really going to help Ed. And he pulled me in his law library and said, I don't think we can do this, kid. I said, why not? He told me about statute of limitations. And this is something that I like about dyslexia. I'm not afraid to ask you what that means. I'm not afraid to tell you I'm not sure I understood. Could you run that by me again? So he explained statute of limitations to me and that statute had run for these people. I said, you really disappoint me. I'd expect more from you than that. And whenever Ed was mad at me, his ears had moved back, and I could see his ears move. And he goes, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, we're sitting here in your law library. How did all these laws come to be? Someone make them up? Somebody challenge them? Somebody create them? Somebody change a law? You can't do that. And he goes, you are right. And that's one moment where I felt like he was thinking like me. So he went and rewrote his legal papers and stated that within 1 year last past, the people had learned the truth about what the chemical was. And by God, he got past the statute. So then I really had to work with the big time firms. And it was just their arrogance. It was beneath them to go to a small desert town. These people didn't have a lot of money. They were free. They loved the stars at night. They could ride their horses. They were happy. And they were poisoned and frightened. And these lawyers just was kind of beneath them to have to deal with them. So I stayed on the case, and I wasn't about to turn these people over to those lawyers unless Ed and I continued to stay involved.
And you've told me that people often say to you, why don't you take a law degree?
I would have never wanted to be a lawyer because they're jerks. You shake a tree and a lawyer falls out. I don't always trust them, and I don't always trust the law. So that would have been the first reason I would have told you why I didn't become a lawyer. But it was really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, one of the law firms said, we'd really like to sponsor you and get you through law school. And I was like, oh, no. And they're like, why not? And I'm like, because I'll never pass the bar. I just was a moment of terror. And they're like, did you go to school, Erin? I'm like, yeah, but no. I said, if I could take it orally, I'd ace it. And it made me stop and think, why would we not be doing that? Why do we have to write something out when we know it?
As long as you know it, doesn't matter how you tell somebody you know it.
But that's the standard of conformity. That's the living inside the matrix, and you got to follow all the rules. And so I'm now comfortable, really, and it's taken me a long, long time. And I'm 64, and this has been going on since I was first grade. I can tell you with pretty good confidence, not a lot's changed for the dyslexics, but I think we're on the cusp. As we're sitting here today and made by dyslexia and the progressions that you've made in opening the world's eyes to, oh my God, if we don't find these people, our brightest minds are going to slide right through the cracks. And we need them. And so I now own who I am. I'm now proud of who I am. And I just don't want to be a lawyer because that's not who I am. I like to be out. I like to be in an environment. I have to be present. I have to feel. I have to touch. I have to sense. And I feel as an attorney, being indoors all day, that natural gift will be taken from me. So, nope. I'm going to stay right where I am.
No box for you. What do you think are the 3 most important things, the 3 bits of advice you would give anyone wanting to be a change maker?
You have to believe in you. That's number one. There's no question in my mind. My mom taught me that just because others choose to see you a certain way, it doesn't have to be the perception or the choice of how it is you see yourself. Don't turn on yourself. And we oftentimes do. That makes me sad now if I talk about that. Turn it inward. See who you are. I have learned that embracing my flaws is the greatest freedom and acceptance I can give to me. Be proud of who you are, just the way you are, flaws and all. I've learned that what I thought were my flaws, what I thought would take me down in life, was my gift. Don't turn your back on yourself. That is absolutely number one. Listen, 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 listen to your gut. I know every one of us, and especially a dyslexic, hears this. It's guttural. You sense it and you don't always know why. Look, if my head, my heart, and my gut aren't in sync, something's wrong. And until I get it in sync, I'm not going to drop what I have to do. Listen. I don't always know what no means. When somebody tells you no, and you're an adult, and you got that guttural sense, everything that we've been talking about, you can say okay, but just maybe quietly go ahead and pursue what it is you think you need to do. I had to do that all the time with Ed. He'd come back and he'd go, I told you not to do that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't always listen so well. But the top 3 things, it's all about you. It's about how you see yourself, your perception of yourself, trusting yourself, listening to yourself, and following through with all of that. Because when you do, I think you're just going to be shocked at what you've been able to accomplish.
You were fearless. Most people would not have taken on such a massive organization. Where do you think that comes from? Not being frightened to challenge the status quo in such a huge way.
Because I didn't care if I was wrong. I'm okay if I'm wrong. I can accept if I'm wrong. But what if I was right? What then? It's PG&E. Who are you anyway? Who are any of us this was human health and life at stake. The environment, the water, the ecosystem, the people's babies, their health, their future. I don't care who you are. I'm standing on my ground. And I will never change that. I don't know if it's called morality. I don't know if it's called principle. Sometimes I think we get off course. But if there was anything worth fighting for and you were going to beat me up over it, I was going to choose this fight. And I'll do it every time.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I have one last question for you. If you had one piece of advice for other dyslexics, what would it be?
Don't let others define who you are. You do that for yourself. Embrace, forgive, love, understand. Whatever it is you may not believe who you are or not always understand why you do what you do. Sometimes there's just something that's greater than we are. Don't fight it. That's who you are. Embrace it. Be proud of it. Stand beside her. That's all you need, is you.
It's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This podcast is sponsored by Microsoft, who, like us, are passionate about empowering dyslexic thinking. Their free tool, Immersive Reader, helps every dyslexic with reading and comprehension. Find out more by clicking the Microsoft link in the podcast notes. And if you'd like to find out more about what dyslexic thinking skills are and how to recognise them in schools, at work or at home, you can take our free training now. Empowering Dyslexic Thinking in Schools, available on Microsoft Learn, and Empowering Dyslexic Thinking at Work, available on LinkedIn Learning. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on future lessons in dyslexic thinking.